welcome to Tech Teaching channel. In previous video, we discussed about the process of how we construct the NFA epsilon having with epsilon to NFA without epsilon. We already discussed in the previous how the process will be, and also what steps we want to do. And for that, today's videos we discussing further one example, one problem, and this is the given convert NFA epsilon to NFA. So this is the given diagram, and the first step is we find out it is a epsilon or not. Yes, it is a epsilon having with NFA, and also we find out the E closure. E closure for every state, I already told, for every state we want to check for Q0, Q1, Q2. For every state we want to check the E closure. For E closure of Q0 equal implies what is there for epsilon transition Q0, Q1, Q2 is there. Now E closure Q1 having Q1 and Q2. For epsilon closure Q2, there is any transactions of epsilon? No, we want write just Q2. There is no transaction, but we are write a Q2 only for everyone. We will write Q0, Q1 and also Q2. This is the E closure for every state. Now the second step is we have a formula. That rule is there. What is that rule? Delta of delta cap Q naught comma epsilon and input means either 0 or 1 or a b. I am writing 0. This is the rule. From this rule we apply to this problem and find out in the every state. The first state is Q0 to 0. We having how many inputs is there? 0, 1, 2. Now 3 inputs is there. For that, for Q0 0, Q1 0, Q2 0. For Q0 1, 2, for Q1 1, 2, for Q2 1, 2. We want check to one state to the all inputs. So the second step is find out in the every state as every input with these three inputs. Okay, the first one is delta of Q0 comma, from we are checking a 0 is if there is a, then we will add the a input here. Here is 0, for that we are checking with 0 only. E closure of delta cap Q0 comma epsilon comma 0. Epsilon closure of delta, where we already know delta cap of Q0 comma epsilon means epsilon closure of Q0. For here Q1 is there, epsilon closure of Q1 is will become. So here epsilon closure of Q0 comma 0. Epsilon closure of delta, we there is having with epsilon closure of Q0 means here is there epsilon closure of Q0. What is the states here? What is the transactions here? Q0, Q1, Q2. So these will be written here. Q0, Q1, Q2, comma 0. Epsilon closure of delta Q0 comma 0. For every state the input will be added. Q0 0, Q1 0, Q2 0, Q1 0, Q2 0. Now epsilon closure of, now we want to check with, is there any transaction for q naught? See in the diagram, is there any transactions for q naught? Q naught is transactions true, one is epsilon and another is self loop as 0. There is a transaction, for that we want to write as q naught union. From q1 there is a transactions epsilon and self loop as 1. There is any transaction with 0? No. For that we will write epsilon union. For q2 there is any transaction with 0? No. There is a 2. For that we will write epsilon. Now what will be the answer? Q naught. Q naught means, what is the q naught state have the transactions? Q naught, q1, q2. This is the answer for q naught 0. Now we want to check for q naught 1. The state is q naught 1. Here delta q1 q naught comma 1 epsilon closure of, what is the rule? Delta cap q1 q naught comma epsilon. Here we written 1 because we are checking with 1 now, so for that we will write here as 1. Okay, now epsilon closure of delta. For these what we will write? Epsilon closure of, here is q naught, for that we will write as q naught only 1. See this? Now epsilon closure of delta, what is the q naught? Epsilon closure of q naught, what is the epsilon closure of q naught? See here, epsilon closure of q naught means what is there? Q naught, q1, q2. Okay, epsilon closure of q naught, q1, q2 comma 1. Okay, now epsilon closure of delta q naught comma 1, q1 comma 1, q2 comma 2, 1. Okay, for everyone we will checking with 1 only. Now is there any transactions with 1 in the diagram? See, for q naught is there any transaction with 1? No. What is the, we will write as epsilon union. For q1 is there any transaction with 1? Yes, absolutely. For q1 have self loop and also that one is 1, so we will write as q1. Now here is there any transaction with 1? No. For that what we will write here? Epsilon union q1 union epsilon. What is the answer? q1. q1 means, here what is the q1 have? q1 and q2, so we will write as q1 and q2. This is the answer for q naught 1. Now we will check to q naught 2. Epsilon closure of delta cap q naught comma epsilon. Here what we will write? 2 or 1? We will checking with 2 now, so for that we will write here as 2. Epsilon closure of delta, what we will write for this? Epsilon closure of, now epsilon closure of delta of q1, what is q naught? We have q naught having series, what is q naught have? Q naught, q1, q2. So For q0 q1 q2 q0 q1 q2 will be written with checking with 2. For that we written as 2 epsilon closure of q0 comma 2 q0 comma 2 q1 comma 2 q2 comma 2. For in the diagram, is there any transaction with 2? We will check q0 2 q1 2 q2 2. See this. For q0, is there any transaction with 2? No. Is there any transaction with q1? No. Is there any transaction with q2? Yes. So for that, for the final state we have the transaction with 2. For that we will write as epsilon union epsilon union. For q2 will be have transaction with 2. So for that q2 will be written q2. For this we will write as q2. Q2 means in the epsilon closure q2 have q2 only. For that we will written as q2. Okay. Now we will check for q1. From here q0 will be completed of input 0 1 2. Now we will check for q1 with 0 input. For everyone the same process will be there. Just we will check with q1 and input with 0. Next q1 1 q2 q1 2. For q1 comma 0 epsilon closure of delta cap of q1. Here we written q0. Now here we are checking with q1. So for that we written q1 epsilon and comma the input is 0. For that 0 will be written epsilon closure of delta of epsilon closure of q1 comma 0. Epsilon closure of delta of what is the epsilon closure of q1 in the first step. We have q1 having with q1 and q2. So these will be written here q1 and q2 comma 0. For every q1 0 and q2 0. Is there any transaction with q1 0? Q1 transaction with 0 and q2 transaction with 0. Just check this in the diagram. Is there any transaction with 0 for q0? Yes. Is the transaction for q0. For q1 and for q2 q2 we will not check because here only we written we will written q1 and q2 only na. Q1 is there any transaction? No. For q2 is there any transaction with 0? So no. For that epsilon union epsilon equal to pi. It is a null set. Okay. Now for q1 with input 1. In the previous what we written, what we checked 0 na. For the now here we will check with 1. Epsilon closure of delta cap q1 comma epsilon is equal to comma 1. From input 1 we written here 1. For state q1 here we written q1 epsilon closure of q1 comma 1. What is the q1 having q1 and q2? Q1 and q2 q1 comma 1 q1 comma 1 q2 comma 1. Is there any transaction q1 with 1? Just check the diagram. Is there any transactions for q0 having with 1? No. q1 having with 1. Is there transaction with 1? Yes. For q2 no transaction. So for that we will just return q1 union epsilon. Is it now? Yeah. q1 is equal to we get q1. For q1 what is the first step for q1 and q2? Now for delta of q1 comma 2 we are checking with 2 input 2 epsilon closure of same formula same rule, but we are changing with 2 input as 2 and the state will be q1. For the same process will be getting what is the transaction where q1 comma 2 q2 comma 2. Is the transaction is there? Just check out the diagram and we will see in the q2 have a transaction with 2. So for that epsilon union q2 in the first step what is the q2 epsilon closure of q2 is there. This is the answer for delta of q2 comma 0 epsilon. For now we will checking for q2 with a 0 input epsilon closure of delta cap. This is the rule, just changing for this is input as 0 and the state will be q2 epsilon closure of delta of epsilon closure of q2. These will be written as epsilon closure of q2. Now just check out in the step 1 epsilon closure of q2 what is the transition has, what is the transition q2 is there. So q2 comma 0. For q2 what is the answer? For q2 is any transaction with 0? For q2 having with 2 only, not 0. For that epsilon will be written, that is a null set. Now for q2 comma 1 For q2 comma 1 we are checking epsilon closure of delta cap q2 comma epsilon comma 1. We are just what we changed here, the input as 1 and the state is q2. The state how is q2 only, because the inputs are 0 1 2, 3 inputs is there. For that we just checking for q2 0, q2 1 and next q2 2. Delta of epsilon closure of q2 comma 1. For q2 what is the transition in the first step? q2 only. So q2 comma 1, is there any transaction q2 with 2? They having only with 2 only, transaction having with 2 only, not 1. So it is a pi, means null set. Now we will check for delta of q2 comma 2. So check this, see this one, q2 comma 2, epsilon closure of delta cap of q2 comma epsilon comma 2, means here we just changed the input is q2 and 2. Epsilon closure of q2, in the first step what is the epsilon closure of q2 have? Just q2 is there. So for that q2 comma 2. Now q2 is what is the epsilon closure of q2 is there? q2. Check out here, these are the three states. This is the initial state and this is the final state. Here for q0 having with 0, sorry, here for q0 to 0, for q0 we are first, the initial state is q0. For checking with q0, what is the answer? q0 q1 q2. What we get? q0 q1 q2, q0 q1 q2. What is the input? Input means we are checking with 0. For that here 0 0 0. Now q0 with 0 is completed. From q0 1, what is the answer? q1 and q2. The transaction is from q1 q0 q1 and q2. One also is, one input is there. So comma 1 comma 1, q0 comma 2 having only q2. So 0 1 2, 0 1 2, q1 comma 0. q1 comma 0 means pi, there is no, so for that we'll just leave it. q1 having with 1, what is the answer? q1 q2. From q1 onwards, q1 q2 will be transitions is there. For what we are checking, q1 is checking. So from q1 there is a transaction for self and q2. What is the input? We are checking with 1 now. So for that the input will be given as 1 1 1. Now for q1 2, q1 having transaction with q2. The answer is q2. అంటే q1 నుంచి q2కి ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ గీయాల. ఏం ఇన్పుట్? q1 నుంచి q2కి ఆల్రెడీ ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ ఉంది, ఇక్కడ 2ని యాడ్ చేస్తాం. ఇప్పుడు q2 నుంచి 0కి ఏముంది? పై. సో వదిలే. డెల్టా ఆఫ్ q2 ఉంటే q2 నుంచి 1 అనమాట. q2 నుంచి ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ గీసుకోవాలి 1కి. ఇక్కడ ఏమైనా స్టేట్ వచ్చిందా? సో నో, క్యాన్సల్. నెక్స్ట్ వచ్చేసి లాస్ట్ వన్ ఏంటి? q2 నుంచి q2కి. ఇదిగోండి q2 నుంచి q2కి. సో ఇక్కడ q2 నుంచి 2 కదా, 2 అన్న ఇన్పుట్తో చెక్ చేసినాం. q2 నుంచి q2కి ట్రాన్సాక్షన్, q2 నుంచి q2కి ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ ఏముంది? ఇన్పుట్ 2. సో ఇది nfa డయాగ్రామ్, ఎప్సిలాన్ లేకుండా వచ్చిన డయాగ్రామ్. మనకి క్వశ్చన్లో వచ్చేసి ఎప్సిలాన్ ట్రాన్సాక్షన్స్ ఇన్పుట్స్ ఉన్నట్టు ఇచ్చాడు. ఇక్కడ మనం ఎన్ఎఫ్ఏగా కన్వర్ట్ చేసాం. 0 0 1 1 1 2 1 1 0 1 2 2. అంటే ఎక్కడైనా ఎప్సిలాన్ వచ్చిందా? సో ఇది ఎన్ఎఫ్ఏ డయాగ్రామ్, కన్వర్షన్ అయిపోయింది. సో దిస్ ఈస్ ద కన్వర్షన్ ఆఫ్ ఎన్ఎఫ్ఏ హ్యావింగ్ విత్ ఎప్సిలాన్ అండ్ converted to just without epsilon. Okay, thank you for watching.